Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. The pre-season is over. 2 weeks today, the teams will hit the track in Melbourne for the first time in an official capacity. But where do we stand? 6 days of testing in Bahrain, a 5-day shakedown in Barcelona before that. All the teams seem to agree there are 2 at the top of the pecking order, but no one really seems to know who is the favourites. Mercedes and Ferrari. Those are the 2 teams on everyone's tongues. Some say Mercedes are better in other conditions, but it was Charles Leclerc today dominating the timesheets. Was it a glory run? Are there other factors in play? Who are the real favourites when we go to Australia? Very much into your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. There's so much to get into today. We're going to start with a few things on the rules. When we hit the track for the first time in Bahrain a week and a half ago, it did appear that there were plenty of issues with these cars. Those have not vanished, but in some respects, there have been some improvements. Watching Charles Leclerc's onboard lap today, yeah, there was a bit of harvesting, there was a bit of super clipping, there was all of that. It didn't massively detract from the enjoyment of watching the lap. I think in race conditions, the problems that Max Verstappen and others raised are still very valid. I do think there were better solutions to the engine problems of these regulations than they have decided to go for. But other drivers are also in agreement. We get Lando Norris that says, look, I actually agree with Max in almost all aspects. I just said, oh, he can retire if he wants, to stir up a bit of intrigue in the media. Now, apparently, Domenicali from Formula 1 and Tombazis have, at least Domenicali has spoken to Verstappen. They apparently chatted for an hour after his criticism to discuss what they could do. One of the solutions is to reduce the amount of battery power that can be used in a race condition, which reduces the necessity for harvesting and other factors. Now again, my question is, would the teams agree to this? Because some teams probably believe they're in a better spot on that regard than others, and therefore they would likely vote against. I don't know what's going to happen on this front. Domenicali says, it's not that bad, guys. Actually, I'll share this quote first. I don't understand what all the panicking is about. There will be incredible racing, there will be a lot of action, and that's the most important thing. We've got to stay calm. Now, just before we discuss his other comments, whenever we watch cars in dirty air, it's bad. I think it might even be worse than last year, which was the worst year of the 2022 era regs, but it doesn't appear great. I mean, if you watch anyone through turn 11, turn 12, if they're following a car half a second behind, they were losing the rear all over the shop. Now, these cars, it's actually great to watch them be a little bit snappier, a little bit easier to correct. You see lots of chopping at the wheel from drivers through corners, and that's not necessarily, obviously it's not as fast as if you're perfectly on the limit all the time, but it does appear that these cars aren't so badly dealing with slides, and you can actually see a driver really wrestle a car and still be very fast. That's not been the case in recent years. There's been talk that you have to drive at 95% in qualifying to get the most out of the ground effect cars. Now, you're not driving at 100% in terms of the battery deployment, but in terms of wrestling with a car, you probably still can. I do have my worries about dirty air this year, and look, I don't like the battery component of these regulations, but I do think that it might be the only thing that actually produces overtaking, because if they put these cars, which I think in many ways are a big step up, I like the look of them, they're smaller, they're lighter, they're more agile, they're slightly more nimble, I think they look better to watch, and the way that the drivers have to drive them is superior. But I do worry that if they all had V10s with a sustainable fuel or whatever, with no hybrid component, or certainly maybe a smaller hybrid component, with no, if it was just active aero with no DRS, we would have a truly train every single Grand Prix. I do think that the battery and the overlap there, that is what's going to produce the overtaking this year. I do fear for how bad the dirty air could be. So Domenicali says there's going to be great overtaking, loads of action. It's like, look, buddy, we'll see what happens when they actually get to Melbourne, right? This is the other thing he said that annoys me. I always try to clarify things internally. There's no point in highlighting certain points that ultimately don't interest the fan. Okay, maybe you're right if you're talking specifically about like the new Drive to Survive era fans that hear Max talking about the way the energy is deployed and they switch their brains off. But Look, I think for most of us who are interested in Formula 1, especially because fans get into F1 for various reasons, and I'm sure there's some of you guys listening to this who got in through Drive to Survive, and I'm not criticizing you because I'm sure many of you got into the sport because you're interested in the personalities, but as you get more and more involved, you start to see the other aspects, the more technical side of the sport, and how it all fits together like a beautiful jigsaw to create such a fascinating sport. Yes, it's about the characters, yes, it's about the cars and the teams, and it's also about the intricate technical details that make this sport so different to any other. And Domenicali says that those comments, apparently they don't interest the fan, so Max shouldn't be talking. It's like, come on, man, right? We've obviously got issues that need to be resolved. You don't have to do damage protection the whole time. I guess that is kind of his job. The other piece, though, is what do we do about it? Now, apparently the teams were running with reduced kilowatt output from their battery to test the idea of saying, look, maybe we don't use the 1,000 horsepower in the Grand Prix. We only use that on a qualifying lap when you need to drain your battery from 100 to 0 in one lap. If you've got to maintain it over the course of a race, maybe we reduce the output down to 300 kilowatts. So it's typically 350 from the electrical part, 400 from the ICE. It's what they were testing, 200, 250, 300, which may create better racing in terms of the necessity to recharge, but as I say, I imagine some teams might be opposed to that if they think they've got an advantage. One team that definitely doesn't have an advantage is Aston Martin. This was Lawrence Stroll today. I mean, it looks like he's aged a few years, doesn't he, bless him, given what's currently happening behind the scenes at Aston Martin, and not just behind the scenes, but in the public domain as well. Honda give a statement today. This was a really disastrous test. It's tough to put into words just how bad this was for Aston Martin. It's very likely that they will not be finishing the Australian Grand Prix. That is currently more likely than not, in my opinion. Honda say, our last run with Alonso yesterday showed a battery-related issue that impacted our test plan. Since then, we've been carrying out simulations on the test bench in Sakura. Due to this and a shortage of power unit parts, because we've gone through them all, we have adapted today's run plan to be very limited and consist only of short stints. What that meant was Stroll went out on track, did 2 laps, came into the pits, did another 2, came into the pits, did another 2, and then called it a day. Pedro de la Rosa says 6 laps was the goal. Like, that's how bad it is on the final day of testing. Now, Antonio Lobato describes what this issue is, and it's pretty bad. So, Honda has a problem, presumably a localized one, that breaks the battery. So, not ideal. Since the problem cannot be resolved in Bahrain, Japan is asking that no more running be done to avoid burning out more batteries that would jeopardize future races and the budget cap that the engine suppliers also have. The only obsession right now is solving that problem before Australia so they can actually aspire to finish the race. The most laps they did in a row was about 25, 26. I mean, not even in a row, but I mean, maybe it was one stint, but even in a race simulation with a pit stop in there, that was all they managed before Alonso's car broke yesterday. So that's the most they've done, right? And as it stands, I don't know how they're going to finish the race. Even if they can qualify for it, right? Even if they can get within 107%, they might not be able to finish the Grand Prix. If the reliability issue is fixed, the second problem, which is that the engine lacks power, is still going to be there, but that's not the priority. This is the thing, I'm sure that Newey would have loved to turn up and actually tested the car aerodynamically, but they've not even been able to get there yet. The first priority is, can we actually finish a race? Then it's like, okay, can we increase the power? Then there's talk about aero. And look, Newey says apparently that he thinks they might have the best chassis in 7 or 8 rounds. But it's not going to matter if you can't finish a race. And as I say, even qualifying for it right now looks like it could be a concern. So it's a major issue with the power units. Again, it's embarrassing for Aston Martin. All the resources, all the equipment. Feel bad for Alonso. Maybe they can figure it out at some point halfway through the season. If they get that resolved, they get their new homologation of the power units because of the additional development and upgrade opportunities that I'm sure they'll be getting. I think at some point they'll be there. It's interesting because there was a real feeling that, well, they were a bit of a wild card this year. Maybe Aston Martin could even win the championship at a real outside shot in 2026. Now, I'm sure the talk is going to become, well, 26 really was just a test year. It's all about maybe 2027 pushing forward, and then 2028 we're going to go for the title or whatever. I'm sure they'll come up with some sort of spin. But the goal is to achieve reliability first, which is pretty embarrassing given that Audi did a ton of laps this weekend. Yeah, they weren't especially fast. Cadillac are a brand new team, not quick either. But some are saying that Aston are even slower than Cadillac, and Cadillac's car has like no downforce at all. But it does have a very reliable Ferrari power unit, as we shall discuss. These are the numbers. Mercedes, Audi, Ferrari, Red Bull, 700 laps on their power units. If you actually look at it across the various teams, this is what you'll find. So across the Mercedes teams, near enough 3,000 laps. Across the 3 Ferrari teams, 2,100 laps. Across the 2 Red Bull teams, 1,400. So, roughly it's 700 laps per team. The same for Audi. Honda, with one team, only 334 and only 6 on the final day. You'd expect it to get better, but actually it only got worse. Couple of quick comments on some new aerodynamic features we saw today. Red Bull have been messing around with this area around the floor, because the Venturi tunnels no longer exist, but it appears that they're finding a way in the regulations to use certain spokes, almost like a fake little inlet to the floor here, to mess around with the airflow. We'll see if that's easy to copy. We also saw Red Bull on their front wing had this little element, which was definitely turning heads. Mercedes also brought a new rear wing to their car today, when they had this new flap element at the top of the wing. You wouldn't usually expect that to even be possible, I don't know, because you've only got 3 planes that are allowed, but it looks like Mercedes have found a way to add this extra additional element. I do wonder what the other teams are going to do when it comes to their actuators. We know that basically all the teams have a central actuator for the active aero, but Ferrari, they tested their inverted wing, as we saw yesterday, with the actuators in the sides, which might be a more efficient route, even if the teams don't copy the inverted rear wing. Ferrari only ran that for a few laps. They're going to test their data, they're going to see what it looks like and see whether they follow through. But that was I doubt that was just a test part. Ferrari said, we're just testing it, guys. Don't look too closely, just a little test. But come on, you're not going to put that much energy into designing something that innovative just to throw it away if there's no good reason to. So I wouldn't be surprised to see that inverted wing back on the car. I'm sure that other teams will be looking at whether it could work for their airflow as well. However, not a clean day for Mercedes, and Ferrari, not only do they top the timesheets, but they also have, I think everyone has to agree, the most reliable power unit. Maybe Red Bull you could even argue as well, and to be fair, Mercedes across all of their teams had very few issues. But Mercedes themselves did have a couple of problems. They had to change the power unit from George's car, whatever it was, earlier in the week. Antonelli then stops on track today. They get it back to the pits. There was some confusion what went wrong. Was it a gearbox issue? Was it a pressure loss in the car? Anyway, they had to change the power unit again. So within, last week and now this week, they've had to make power unit adjustments again. Ferrari ran the whole of the Barcelona shakedown, the whole of the first Bahrain test, with one power unit, and the only issues that Ferrari encountered, as we understand from a reliability perspective, was sensor malfunctions. The sensors went wrong. They had maybe some sort of minor issues with Hamilton's car yesterday. The same car, right? But, when Hamilton was in the car in the morning, they tried the inverted rear wing, they brought it into the pits, they had some issues. But from an engine perspective, Ferrari have been absolutely bulletproof. Not the same can be said for Mercedes. So, yes, they had to put in another engine. That's the second time they've had to do that now, due to some reliability concerns. So, yes, Mercedes, if you look at the long-run data, and again, it's difficult to really look at it in great detail because George and Mercedes this week didn't do a race sim. They only did 10 to 12 lap stints. So we don't have great comparison data. But the consistency of George and Kimi's long-run performance, sometimes down into the 136s, was very impressive, and it didn't feel like too many other teams, apart from maybe Ferrari, could get close to that. So there's still a reason why people have Mercedes probably as the favourites. Their long-run pace was very, very strong. there is a feeling that they have been sandbagging more than most, certainly in light of this whole compression ratio drama recently. But there is also the other argument about the starts, because Mercedes' practice starts have not been good. And as George Russell says, the starts that I've made this week were worse than my worst ever start in Formula 1. Lewis was down in P11, he was actually P9, but whatever. He got into P1. At this stage, it doesn't matter how quick you are, because if you are starting from P9, this was actually the side-on footage of yesterday's practice start. This was Kimi Antonelli, this was Max Verstappen. And in a second, you'll look back to P3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is Lewis Hamilton absolutely rocketing past absolutely everyone. And, well, if I just zoom out real quick, you can see that Hamilton's already right on the gearbox of all of the front runners. So that was the start that we talked about yesterday, which turned heads. Similar, to be honest, today, not from his teammate Charles Leclerc, but actually from a different Ferrari-powered car that we shall get to. But George says, look, to get off the line, you've got to win, you've got to get off the line well. And this year, the gaps in qualifying are going to be bigger, right? Like, I'm not expecting, we'll see, but I'm not expecting the Ferraris to be qualifying P8, P14, right? Even if the Ferrari in qualifying is 6/10 off the Mercedes, that's probably still in the top 8, right? Whereas in recent years, that would probably be further down the grid. Now, because we're expecting McLaren, Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull in some order or another, and then everyone else is going to be way behind. That's the current feeling. It's expected there will be bigger gaps. It'll be circuit specific as well. The point is, if Ferrari are consistently qualifying in the top 4, top 5, and they've got that amount of advantage off the starts, you know, they're going to be leading every race by turn 1, you would think. Of course, it's not that simple. Other teams will make improvements, and they have. We already saw that today. But it's a good reason why some are thinking that maybe Ferrari are indeed the favourites. That's because Leclerc had a fantastic afternoon in that car. Put in a good lap time on the C3 tyre, 1:32.6. Then he put on the C4 tyre, the step softer compound, and went way faster. His fastest time of any was a 1:31.9. It dipped into the 1:31s. Nobody else was close to that. He had a number of lap times in the low 1:32s as well. Now, Norris's time, which was about 9/10 behind Leclerc, was in the high 1:32s on the C3. So in a like-by-like tyre comparison, it wasn't like there was a huge amount in it, but it was certainly very relevant that Leclerc put in a time which was extremely competitive, by the way. This 1:31.9 was only 2/10 off the fastest time that Max set in 2022. Now, yeah, these cars have active aero. They're faster on the straights. But watching that lap from Leclerc was great to watch. It looked super on the limit. The car looked really fast and nimble. And I don't know, it was a pleasure to watch all of these laps that Leclerc was doing. The Ferrari, I think, especially through turn 10, looked super hooked up. The traction was just absolutely immense, I thought. So it was an impressive performance from the Ferrari and from Leclerc. I think they definitely showed more of their hands than others have. There's not much doubt about that. And there is a feeling that there's a pretty big offset and delta between the C4 and the C3. So there will be something of that in play as well. In fact, De Kester says it here. Theoretically, the C4 should be 6 to 8 tenths faster than the C3 used by Russell and Norris. Everyone is hiding their performance a lot. Everyone is sandbagging, some more than others. He thinks there's still a second to find. Because last year in qualifying, Leclerc at Bahrain, in last year's car, was in like the low 130s. So already he's in the 131s. De Kester thinks that when we actually get to Bahrain, it will be in the 130s probably. As I say, Verstappen's time in 2022 was similar to what Leclerc put in today. The time that Leclerc did today would actually have made Q2 in Bahrain last year. So that goes to show how competitive that Ferrari was looking, and also just how quick these cars might potentially be in the coming years already. And I think there have been some improvements made in the quality of what we're seeing, the product, over these last 6 days of testing. Now, we did have one final practice start. Lots of key storylines here. This is George Russell maintaining the lead into turn 1 from Charles Leclerc. Charles started P5 on the grid here. And, well, we'll just see what happens. So everyone gets away. Charles does get a good start. It wasn't like an absolute Hamilton rocket ship start. but in the back you'll see it's near enough 6 wide. The best start, I thought, went to Lando Norris, but I think actually went to Ollie Behrman. Behrman here was on the left. I think he started right at the back of the grid, like last of anyone. And he gets past all of these boys, and by the time he's in turn 1, he's 4th. Now, Lando also had a real rocket ship start, was maybe level or ahead of Behrman, but Gasly was in such a position that Lando didn't want to risk going around the outside onto the grass, so he backed out of it. But yeah, McLaren figured out something today because Piastri's launch at lunch was better and Norris's here was really good as well, like really good. May have been just as good as Hamilton's that we saw yesterday. Now, I don't know if the Ferrari engines will be more consistent. I think possibly they will be in terms of the quality of the launch. But the other teams will figure it out as well. And when the other teams get it right, they've still got just enough power to make some remarkable acceleration happen with so much torque that these cars have. But yeah, McLaren had a great launch today. So it's not like Ferrari are going to go from P10 to P1 every single race. But the Ferrari units do seem better. And Behrman, I think, said in the press conference, like, this is the greatest launch I've ever had from a car. And then he did it again last of the day when he goes from last to literally overtaking everyone up to 4th. I mean, he wasn't far behind the leaders by the time he got to turn 1. So lots to say about that. These, though, were the fastest times. So Lando was 9 tenths down. As I say, a good 7 tenths of that may just be in the compounds. Then Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. Again, Red Bull haven't been a huge talking point of the last couple of days. There is a feeling that they've got into a little bit of sandbagging mode as well. The first day of the test, they hit 344 kph on the straight, and everyone was saying that Red Bull have unbelievable deployment. They've not even come close to those numbers since, really, nor has anybody else. So I think it's pretty clear that Red Bull have, let's say, toned it down a little bit, and Mercedes are still probably going to be waxing lyrical about Red Bull's deployment and how impressive their power unit is and all this. But I think as a result of all that, and just the Red Bull not looking as hooked up as consistently, they've dropped away from the favourite conversation and have kind of fallen back into the McLaren conversation as, okay, who is the best that isn't a Ferrari or a Mercedes? Andrea Stella says there's more parts to come in Melbourne. We've got a weight reduction program for the car that we're going to be going through, but right now, the Ferrari does look faster than the McLaren, and this is the word in the paddock. So based on what we've seen over the last 6 days, the overall feeling is that Mercedes and Ferrari are best positioned. First of all, it's great that we don't really know. It's possible in Melbourne there will be a clear front runner. But we come out of 11 days, effectively, of testing. I know that the shakedown was only 3 of 5. But we come out of all that time period, and we still don't really know. I don't think McLaren are the best. I do think there is a world where Red Bull just could be in Max's hands, because Mercedes seem pretty convinced that they've got more to show from their electrical side that they only gave us a glimpse of on the first day. That's interesting. Mercedes or Ferrari, who knows? Mercedes also have some more reliability gremlins, it feels like, but their long-run pace looks ultra consistent and probably more impressive than anyone. But the fastest overall times went to Ferrari. So, look, who's sandbagging more than others? It's difficult to say. Again, this was the lap where Leclerc went another 3 tenths faster, purple, to drop into the 131s. The other tidbits here from Nate Saunders is people generally have Mercedes first. Then Ferrari, McLaren and Red Bull are interchangeable. So that's the feeling. Alpine and Haas likely top of the group. Again, it's tough to say. He also goes on to say, hard to convey how bleak the mood is at Aston. They look absolutely shell-shocked. Things are that bad, they're going to be a race with Cadillac. So that's not ideal. Andrea Stella says that Mercedes and Ferrari are the favourites, but of course he would say that. So look, those are the takeaways. Toto Wolff's opinion is, look, let's just see what happens when the flag drops in Melbourne, because that's when all the BS ends and the reality begins. I think there's been a lot of BS from teams over the last few days. I think Mercedes have been sandbagging. I think Red Bull have been sandbagging. I think McLaren and Ferrari have shown us more of their hands, certainly today. but I really don't know how to call it going into Melbourne. So I'm sure we're going to get big updates over the next couple of weeks. Thanks all for watching the coverage over the last few days. It's been such a fascinating preseason, and I'm not expecting that to change because the debriefs are beginning, the analysis will begin, the upgrades are going to be on their way as well. We're going to see an awful lot of things happening over the next 2 weeks before we even get to the first Grand Prix of the season. So yes, thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Subscribe if you're new, all that good stuff, and I'll see you next time.